Today we're diving deep into the surprising emotions that fuel those sparks.
I think it's way more intricate than just like physical attraction.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We've got data from a massive online survey, over 436,000 people sharing which emotions they actually find erotic.
Wow, that's a lot of data.
It is.
Okay, so
Think of it like a map of desire revealing some pretty unexpected turns.
a map of desire. I love that. So this wasn't just like your typical, what's your favorite fantasy kind of survey.
Exactly. This one went deeper, asking people about the feelings they find erotic,
Okay.
both in themselves and in their partners.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and the results challenge a lot of the usual assumptions about what gets us going.
Okay, I am intrigued.
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
Hit me with some of these surprising findings.
Well, one that really jumps out is the popularity of calmness serenity as an erotic emotion.
Calmness.
Yeah, you might not think of calmness as particularly sexy, but it was a top pick, especially for women.
Really? I'm kind of picturing like, candlelight and smooth jazz.
Right,
Not
right.
exactly like setting hearts on fire.
But think about it. Calmness can signal safety, deep trust, that feeling of letting your guard down completely.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people, that vulnerability is incredibly alluring.
Yeah.
Almost like emotional nakedness can be as powerful as the physical kind.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Like the world's chaotic enough.
Yeah.
So finding that space of absolute peace with someone
Right.
could be incredibly intense in its own way.
Precisely. And the data backs that up. Around 50 to 60% of women in the survey found safety, warmth, and calmness serenity appealing.
Wow.
So this isn't just a fringe idea.
Yeah.
It's a core part of desire for a huge chunk of the population.
So maybe those movie scenes of wild passion aren't the whole story.
Right.
Maybe real desire is more nuanced than that.
Exactly. What's erotic for one person might be a total turnoff for another.
Yeah.
There's no one size fits all when it comes to these feelings.
All right, so we've got calmness as a surprise contender in the erotic arena.
Right.
What else did this survey uncover?
Well, as you might expect, good old-fashioned desire was a strong contender.
Okay.
Over 90% of respondents, both men and women, selected eagerness desire as an emotion they found erotic.
I guess there's something to be said for knowing your partner is truly enthusiastic about being with you.
Yes.
Not just anyone, it's like validation on the deepest level.
And that mutuality seems key. Feeling desired fuels desire in return,
Absolutely.
creating this feedback loop of wanting and being wanted.
Yeah, it's not just a one-way street then. It's about that spark of connection, that feeling of we're both in this together.
Exactly.
Okay, so eagerness is huge. What about love? I'm guessing that was up there too.
You guessed right. Love romance was a big one, with
Oh.
70 to 80% of participants finding it erotically appealing.
So this points to emotional connection being a major player in the game of desire. It's not just about physical attraction, but feeling truly seen and appreciated by your partner.
Yeah,
That sense of intimacy.
absolutely. Which brings us to another fascinating area. The survey explored the role of power dynamics in desire.
Now, this is where things could get really interesting.
Yes.
We're talking about emotions like power smugness, powerlessness, vulnerability, even cruelty, brutality came up.
Yeah.
Definitely wading into some potentially taboo territory here.
True. And the survey reveals some intriguing gender differences in how these emotions get eroticized.
Oh,
For example, men were more likely to be aroused by witnessing vulnerability in their partners.
Interesting.
whereas women were more likely to be aroused by feeling vulnerable themselves.
So there's this interesting flip happening where the focus of arousal shifts depending on your gender.
Yeah.
It's not just about wanting to dominate or be dominated.
Right.
It's about how those dynamics play out in a way that feels uniquely arousing to you.
Exactly. And even emotions that are often considered negative, like humiliation or worthlessness, weren't completely off the table.
Yeah.
Around 15 to 20% of respondents indicated that these held some erotic charge for them.
Okay, so we're talking about a significant portion of the population finding some level of eroticism in these more, shall we say, intense emotions.
Right.
It really challenges our assumptions about what's considered normal when it comes to desire.
It definitely pushes the boundaries of what we typically think of as sexy, but it highlights the fact that desire is a vast and varied landscape, and what might be repulsive to one person could be incredibly alluring to another.
And this isn't necessarily about acting out those desires in real life, right?
Right.
We're talking about fantasies and what gets people going in their minds, which might be totally different from how they behave in reality.
Exactly. Fantasy provides a safe space to explore those boundaries and delve into feelings that might be taboo or even frightening in real-life situations.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that desire doesn't always translate into action.
Yeah.
And what we fantasize about doesn't necessarily reflect our moral compass or how we treat others.
For sure. It seems like we're really starting to peel back the layers of what makes desire tick.
Yeah.
It's not just about surface level attraction.
Right.
It's this complex interplay of emotions, power dynamics, and personal experiences.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, were there any specific emotions that stood out as particularly unexpected or thought-provoking?
Absolutely. One of the most fascinating findings in something you might want to consider in your own life is what I call the calmness paradox. We're constantly bombarded with messages that passion and excitement are the keys to a great sex life. But the data paints a different picture.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that calmness was a surprisingly popular choice, especially for women.
Right.
But how do we reconcile that with the idea that sex should be, well, sexy? Does calmness really belong in the same sentence as eroticism?
It does seem counterintuitive, right? But despite all those tropes about fiery passion, calmness and serenity resonated with a significant number of people, about half of the women and roughly 40% of the men. This suggests that for many, it's not just about the thrill of the chase or the heat of the moment.
Yeah.
It's about feeling safe, secure, and deeply connected with their partner.
It's interesting because we often associate calmness with things like meditation or a quiet night in.
Right.
Not necessarily something that would spark desire,
Well,
but I can see how that sense of peace and security could create a powerful foundation for intimacy.
Think about it. When you feel completely at ease with someone, you can let go of all pretense and just be yourself.
Yeah.
That kind of vulnerability can be incredibly alluring and create a space for deep emotional connection, which can be just as satisfying, if not more so, than purely physical passion.
It's like that feeling of coming home after a long day and sinking into a warm bath.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily exciting, but it's deeply comforting and allows you to fully relax and let go.
Right.
Maybe that same sense of ease and surrender plays a role in erotic experiences as well.
That's a great analogy, and it challenges the notion that sex always has to be wild and intense to be fulfilling.
Okay.
Sometimes the most erotic experiences are those that are quiet, tender, and emotionally intimate.
This really makes you question those societal expectations around what a good sex life should look like.
Right.
Maybe we're too focused on the physical aspects and not paying enough attention to the emotional foundations that make intimacy truly satisfying.
I think that's a valuable insight.
Yeah.
We often talk about sexual chemistry,
Yeah.
but maybe emotional compatibility is just as important, if not more so. Creating a space where both partners feel safe, understood, and accepted can be incredibly powerful and lead to a deeper level of intimacy than simply focusing on physical attraction.
Okay, so we've got calmness as a surprising aphrodisiac. What other unexpected findings emerged from this survey?
But recall how we talked about men being more likely to be aroused by witnessing vulnerability in their partners.
Yes.
This ties into another fascinating insight: men's often unspoken desire for vulnerability.
You mean even though men are often portrayed as the strong stoic types,
Mm-hmm.
they're actually drawn to vulnerability in their partners that seems to go against a lot of the cultural messages we receive about masculinity.
It does seem counterintuitive, but the data suggests it's true. Men ranks others' vulnerability among their top 5 emotional triggers. And this isn't just about physical vulnerability. It's about emotional openness, the willingness to share fears, insecurities, and dreams.
So maybe all those macho stereotypes aren't telling the whole story. Perhaps beneath the surface, men are craving emotional connection and intimacy just as much as women, but they're not always given the space or permission to express those desires.
That's a very likely interpretation. It could be that witnessing vulnerability in their partners allows men to tap into their own emotional depths and feel a stronger sense of connection. It might also create a sense of safety and trust, allowing them to let down their own guard and express their own vulnerabilities without fear of judgment.
It makes you wonder if by encouraging men to embrace vulnerability, we could create more fulfilling relationships for both partners. If men felt more comfortable expressing their emotions, perhaps they could experience deeper levels of intimacy and connection.
I completely agree. It's about creating a culture where vulnerability is seen as a strength, not a weakness for both men and women. And this ties into another important point that emerged from the survey.
Okay.
The recognition that even those emotions we typically label as negative or taboo have a place in the erotic landscape.
This is what I find so fascinating about this whole conversation. It's really challenging our assumptions about what's considered normal or acceptable when it comes to desire. We've already touched on the fact that some people find humiliation or cruelty arousing, but the survey also revealed that even emotions like despair and horror had a small but consistent following. It's like there's this whole spectrum of erotic emotions, and we've been taught to focus on just a narrow slice of it.
Exactly, and it's important to remember that this isn't just about kinky fetishes or BDSM. Even within the realm of what we might consider vanilla sexuality, there's a huge range of emotional experiences that people find erotic.
So how do we make sense of all this information and apply it to our own lives? It seems like we're being asked to rethink a lot of what we've been told about desire.
I think the key takeaway is the importance of open-mindedness and acceptance. We need to recognize that there's no right or wrong way to experience desire, and what turns one person on might be completely different from what turns another person on.
It's like we've been handed this whole new vocabulary for understanding our desires.
Yeah.
One that goes beyond the usual likes and dislikes, and it makes you realize how limiting those old categories can be.
Exactly. Think of it this way, if you only ever tasted one type of food, you'd have a very limited understanding of what's possible in the culinary world.
Yeah.
It's the same with desire. The more we explore, the more we discover about ourselves and what truly brings us pleasure and fulfillment.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening,
Good.
and it really highlights how much we learn when we go beyond those surface-level assumptions about what's considered normal or acceptable when it comes to desire.
Yeah, and that exploration can be incredibly rewarding, both for ourselves and for our relationships.
This makes me think about how crucial communication is in relationships. If our desires are so complex and nuanced, how do we even begin to talk about them with our partners in a way that feels safe and open?
That's such a vital point. Open communication is essential for understanding each other's desires,
Right.
exploring new possibilities together, and ultimately creating a truly fulfilling and intimate connection. And it starts with creating a space where both partners feel safe, sharing their deepest desires and fantasies without fear of judgment or rejection.
So it's not just about saying what you like and don't like. It's about being curious about your partner's desires, asking questions, and really listening to their responses.
Yeah.
Even if they express something you might not initially understand or relate to.
Right. And it's about remembering that what we find erotic is deeply personal and can be influenced by a whole host of factors: our past experiences, our cultural background, our individual personality, and even things like our current mood or stress level. So approaching these conversations with empathy and a willingness to learn is key.
It seems like one of the biggest takeaways from this deep dive is the importance of challenging those preconceived notions we have about desire.
Yeah.
We often get stuck in these narrow categories of what's normal or appropriate, and it can really limit our ability to fully explore and experience the vast spectrum of human sexuality.
Absolutely. And that starts with acknowledging that there's no one right way to experience desire.
Yeah.
What turns one person on might be completely different from what turns another person on, and that's okay.
It's about celebrating that diversity and recognizing that it's what makes human sexuality so fascinating and complex. And by embracing that complexity, we can move beyond simplistic stereotypes and create a more open, honest, and fulfilling approach to intimacy.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground today, wouldn't you say?
We certainly have. We've explored the surprising emotions we find erotic, debunked some common myths about desire, and hopefully given our listeners plenty to think about when it comes to their own emotional map of desire.
We've learned that calmness can be just as erotic as excitement, that power dynamics play a significant role in shaping desire, and that even those emotions we often label as taboo can hold erotic potential for some.
But perhaps most importantly, we've emphasized that there's no one right way to experience desire. What turns us on is as individual as we are, and that's something to be celebrated, not shamed.
That brings us to a final thought-provoking question for you now that you've glimpsed the emotional landscape of desire. What emotions resonate most strongly with you, and what might those preferences reveal about your own unique needs experiences and the stories you tell yourself about intimacy?
It's definitely something to ponder, and it's just the beginning of the journey. Exploring our own desires is an ongoing process, and the more we learn, the more fulfilling our relationships can be.
So keep exploring, keep communicating, and most importantly, keep an open mind. The world of desire is vast and full of surprises waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep it curious.